Welcome to Amplify, the personal brand business show. Today on the show, Bob is speaking with Deb Zahn.
If your desire is to get paid separate and apart from being an employee within an organization, and you're going to get paid to go in and help them with a whole host of variety of things, then you can call yourself a consultant. Some people might choose to call themselves a contractor. Some people might choose to call themselves freelancers, but consultants generally go in and provide services and advice to people within companies and organizations to either help them solve problems or help them achieve something that they couldn't achieve without that help.
Hi there and welcome back to the Personal Brand Business Show. My name is Bob Gentle and every week I speak with incredible people who share their secrets to building, marketing and monetizing their expertise, intentionally growing a unique personal brand and the mindset you need for your business to grow and thrive. If you're new to the show, then while you still have your device in your hand, take a second to subscribe. That way you won't miss a single thing. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, that's the little plus or follow button that's really difficult to find. So for a lot of my audience, selling their services is a big deal. And how we package that really depends on how you deliver value to your customers. And for a lot of people, at least one slice of this is going to be what you would call consulting. So this week, I am thrilled to welcome Deb Zahn from the Craft of Consulting to the podcast. Deb, welcome.
Thank you so much, Bob. I'm delighted to be here.
So for the listener who's meeting you for the very first time, can we maybe just start by telling us a little bit about who you are, where you are, and what you do?
You bet. So I am actually calling from the beautiful Hudson Valley of New York, and I am actually two things. So on the Craft of Consulting side, that is a business I have that is I would consider that my soul business, meaning from my soul, in that I help people who really want to be successful consultants. And that means they want to have, the freedom, the flexibility, the lifestyle that they want to have, that they can have with consulting. I help them figure out how to do that, particularly in their first few years, which are kind of the make or break it years of, is this going to work? And if it's going to work, then I get that lifestyle. And so I help them figure out how to make it work for them. And then on the other side, I'm still a practicing consultant. So I work in the healthcare space in the United States, which needs a lot of help. And so the beauty of that is that anything I'm talking about with other consultants, I've likely applied myself and applied within the last couple weeks.
So the first most obvious daft laddie question that I have to ask is, how would you define consulting? Because it's such a potentially catch-all bucket.
Yeah. And it's funny because a lot of people have had conversations with struggle with that, whether or not to call themselves that. And I said, look, there is no single definition, but what I would say is if your desire is to get paid separate and apart from being an employee within an organization, and you're going to get paid to go in and help them with a whole host of variety of things, then you can call yourself a consultant. Some people might choose to call themselves a contractor. Some people might choose to call themselves freelancers, but consultants generally go in and provide services and advice to people within companies and organizations to either help them solve problems or help them achieve something that they couldn't achieve without that help. And that's a really broad category, but it's fine. And then the other thing I tell people is also pay attention to your market. If your market uses the term consulting for the types of things that you do, then it's perfectly reasonable to call yourself a consultant. If they use other terms that are going to make more sense when you're out in your market, then consider those other terms. But consulting can encompass a lot. So part of what I do as a consultant is sometimes I get hired to be a strategic advisor. Sometimes that looks like I'm actually a coach, let's say to a CEO within an organization, but I still call myself a consultant because that makes more sense within my market.
I think with consultants and consulting, if you're coming from not having done this before, there's an awful lot of potential for imposter syndrome. I think is probably something that most people, even if they are consultants and they're comfortable with the idea of consulting, they regularly struggle with. Somebody used the phrase the other day, new level and new devil. And I think for me, this really sums up this particular issue. How do you help people past this particular monster?
Yeah, and it is definitely a monster. And most of the time, I would say I see it more than not. So there's occasionally I see people who have an abundance of confidence, and this is not a beast that they struggle with, and they have other issues, but that's not one of them. But I see this quite a bit. And the original term that was used back in the day was largely applied to women. My experience has been that men and women both experience this. And so what I would say is, first of all, it's the best way when you're having self-doubt or you're having imposter syndrome or anything that looks like that, is to not believe the hype. And so I think in some way we build cases against ourselves. And some of this is based on past experiences, either in our professional lives and our personal lives. I've certainly been in employed situations where they were toxic, and people, including myself, were made to feel like imposters. And that's part of the history that I'm bringing to whatever I'm feeling as I'm coming into being a consultant. And some of it is just based on, you're doing something brand new that you've never done before, that you have not yet gained mastery over. And so self-doubt, feeling like you really aren't the right person to do it is something typical and expected. So first of all, is not to believe the stories that you're telling yourself, and look at them with a little more interrogating, critical eye, and say, is this actually true? Is any part of this true? Is it all true? Is none of it true? And to start to get curious about what's actually going on when these feelings are emerging. And, to not spend a lot of time necessarily therapizing around it, because I think that can be helpful, but it can also be sort of a kind of an endless loop that you can get in. But to me, one of the most powerful things is to go and get evidence about what's actually true. And so this is where I tell folks who, might, I'm thinking of one person in particular that I worked with that had achieved really amazing things when she was employed, but she couldn't imagine that anybody was going to pay her because she didn't have this, she didn't have this, she didn't have this, and she just she felt very, very much like a fraud. And so what I advised her to do was to go and have some conversations with people who you trust, who will tell you the truth, but aren't naysayers. Like, you want to avoid the people who are struggling with their own issues or tend to be naysayers, but you also want people who are very honest with you. And go and have a conversation with them and ask them about things that you've done and what they thought that you actually did to contribute to the success of a particular outcome, or how you achieved a particular outcome. I think that's worth an exercise also, is to think very specifically, because imposter syndrome can be, very kind of abstract and just kind of a big squishy feeling. And so I like to get down to, okay, let's talk about the specifics. Let me think about a particular project that ended with success, or something I did that ended with success, very deliberately thinking through, how did I contribute to it? How did I achieve that? Asking and going and asking those, honest people to also give you feedback, because then you're going to hear things that you didn't even think about that you did. And that starts to build a little more evidence behind what is actually true about you. I then like to back that up with a little market intelligence, because I want to know that those things are actually valuable. So I might go have some conversations with people who understand my market and the people that I most want to work with really well, and talk to them about, those, skills and attributes and whatnot that I've heard about me or that I've assessed about me, and talk about whether or not those are valuable. And the reason that step I think is really important is that often we feel anxiety, doubt a lot of things about, doing this new thing of being a consultant. And it might first show up as imposter syndrome, but, we're really creative. So as soon as we start to get imposter syndrome, in a little better check, it's easy that another mindset trap can just pop up. So I like to go all the way through, assess really what the value is of those things in your market. And then that gives you further evidence, not just that you have skills and abilities and attributes that are going to contribute to having a successful business, but that also there's a market for all of those things. And that can help with, other mindset traps like perceived scarcity. But when in doubt, don't believe the hype. And the hype is the story that you're telling yourself about, who you are and who you are not, and then go gather evidence about what is actually true.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think one of the things with imposter syndrome or comparison or anything else that you want to come up with as a mindset issue, it generally comes back to the central theme of fear. And the thing with fear is that it shrinks in the light, and the more you examine it and the more you get specific, the more you find actually it's just little shadow puppets.
That's right. That's right.
I think one of the things that we all underestimate is how small wins can actually be really big. We underestimate the impact we often have. And as you said, asking people to reflect back to you about the value that you bring will often allow you to look at what you're doing in a very different light and almost objectify your value, because a lot of us, we diminish the value that we bring a lot of the time. And for anybody that's looking at going into consulting for the first time, they're going to have this to deal with a lot more often than most. What advice would you have for somebody that's thinking, okay, I want to look at maybe bringing consulting into some of what I'm doing? What does opening that door actually look like in a practical sense for somebody who's never done it before?
Yeah, in a very practical sense, there's some steps that I think are important to take, that if you take them, everything after that gets easier. And I'll say what those are in a minute, but I want to say something about what I typically see is that folks will, if they allow themselves to take the leap or even dip their toe in the water, they often just say, okay, hey folks, I'm a consultant now. And then when people don't magically start pouring in and saying, oh, I want to hire you, then that's when the, self-doubt, imposter syndrome, and all of those other things, perceived scarcity come pouring in, as opposed to how do you set yourself up for success by answering some fundamental questions at the beginning. And the first question that I always encourage folks to answer is, who's your buyer? And I use the term buyer very deliberately. I know the term ideal client, I know the term, avatar, but I feel like those remove it too much away from that this is a business. And in order to have a business, you have to have, good people who want to give you money to do good things. And those are called buyers. So let's just call them buyers, because that's us being honest with ourselves. But if you can start with the who, which is who's the, type of person that I most want to work with. And again, it's not an organization, it's not a company. People buy from people. So you got to think through, who is that person? What's their position? Where, are they within a particular industry? Are they across industries? Do they, have a, certain role within an organization? Are there certain attributes of them that this essentially defines who I think my buyer is? If you can start there, and everything gets easier after that. And the problem is what I see a lot of folks do is that feels scary and limiting, because if I define that, too precisely, too narrowly, there's never going to be enough business out there for me. That's sort of the thing that I see that people get stuck in their head. So instead they say, well, there's, infinite number, dozens and dozens of people that I could consider my buyer. But if that's true, then you don't know what the next thing to do is, because so then everything gets fuzzy after that, because they're all very different. They all would want different things. They'd be interested in different things. The way that you would gain, exposure to them would be different. And then it's easy to get a feeling of overwhelm because you don't know what the most important and, fruitful next step would be. So I always start with, who's your buyer? Get very specific about what that type of person is. So when I'm consulting, my buyer is a CEO. It's particular sectors within the healthcare industry in the United States. They have to have, certain amount of annual budget because they have to be able to afford me. I don't want to pick buyers that can't actually afford me. And, they're in, certain geography. And then there's a bunch of other attributes that I also have used to define what that buyer is. Once I know that, then I can answer the what question, which is what do they care enough about that they would be willing to spend money on a consultant to solve or achieve? And that's where you're really getting at, what are their struggles? What are the problems they're trying to solve? What are the things they're trying to achieve or that they aspire to? And that's very specific to who I defined as the who, because if I'm focused on a CEO, they have different things that they care about and influence their buying decisions. If I'm looking at a CFO or I'm looking at an HR director, they care about different things. And so that's why I have to know the who so I can understand what do they care enough about. And then I sort of pause and I think about, well, why am I picking them? And what is it about me that makes sense for picking that who that, that has those types of things that they care about? Because then you have to look back and think about your consulting business goals. What is it, what type of income do you want to bring in? How much do you want to work? What do you want your life to look like? And to pause and to think very carefully, because it is so easy as a consultant to just start doing stuff or trying to get business, getting business, and then suddenly you have a life that doesn't look like that freedom and flexibility or whatever else that you wanted in your life. And then to think about, okay, if that's the right buyer, if I need to tweak that, let me tweak that. Let me think more, carefully again about what they care enough about to spend money on a consultant. And then I can think about where are they and where do they show up and engage? Again, a mistake that I see a lot of consultants make is they start, well, I guess I have to do, social media. And so let me post everywhere. Well, that doesn't make sense. If your buyer's not on Instagram, why are you spending time and energy and potentially money on showing up on a platform that they don't engage with? Does it even make sense to do social media marketing relative to where they are? If it does, where? If not, where else can you actually engage with them? So you think through from both an outreach and marketing perspective where they are so that now you can make the wisest possible choices about how you're going to spend your time, energy, and whatever you're going to invest. And then I think about, and again, this is the last one, and this is kind of the foundational things I tell folks to do, is to think about the how. So then what do I offer that helps them get the results that they care about? Because now I know them really well and give them the experience they expect to give, because I define value as results plus experience. And every buyer has sort of different versions of the type of stellar experience that they want to have. But now I can think through, what am I offering now in whatever markets I've decided that I'm going to focus on, with the buyers that I'm going to focus on, that is going to be compelling and relevant to them. So it's going to be easier to outreach to the right people. It's going to be easier to market to the right people, say things that they care about, say things that are going to, resonate with them, get into conversations that are truly going to be meaningful because you're talking to the right people and you're talking about the right stuff. And that'll make it easier to ultimately get hired more as a consultant. Without that foundation, it ends up being throwing spaghetti against the wall way too often.
I am so glad I have an AI tool that summarizes my podcast episodes for me, because there was so much in there. It's just kicking around my brain. I really hope people were listening, because that was, honestly, we could stop the podcast there and we'd be great.
And I'm actually, Bob, I have a visual that has all of that I'll be happy to share with your audience. I'll send that to you afterwards, and feel free to share it. It sort of walks people through that process.
Just share it with me. I'm not sharing it with anyone. I'm just kidding. One of the things about experts is experts can tell as soon as they meet somebody, you're going to fly and you're going to struggle without some serious change. And I'm curious from you, when you meet somebody, what is it that tells you this person is going to struggle? Because I think for a lot of people, this will help them reflect on, you know what, I thought I was really smart, but actually I can see in what Deb's talking about there that maybe I need to do some self-examination here.
Yeah. So you just said it, is if they are not attuned to self-reflection, if they do not have that as a, not like, well-developed skill, even if they know how to do it a little bit, they're going to have an easier time. Self-reflection is one of the most important tools for being a consultant, because you have so many choices that you need to make. You have so many things that you need to be attuned to and pay attention to, and knowing how, who and how, who you are and how you function and operate, and your weaknesses, and all of those things is really critical in myriad ways. It's so that to me is one of the most important things. The other is if they have a willingness to give themselves the gift of focus and clarity. So the things that I just talked about I consider those to be the gifts of focus and clarity. Once you have those, everything gets easier after that. It doesn't mean everything is easy, it just gets easier. And if they are unwilling to, because of, fear, or they don't believe it, or, whatever the reason might be, and they want to just keep doing the same thing over and over again and hoping that, they get different results, they're going to struggle, and they're going to have a really hard time being a successful consultant. By the way, that works on the client side too. If I see the clients lack some of those things, then I may choose not to work with them, because that may end up just being an exercise in frustration where I'm unable to get them the results that they want or give them the experience they want. So I pay attention to, do folks have enough self-reflection that this can be, that they can really pay attention to what they're doing, experiment. If it doesn't work, be honest with themselves, be honest, when they get information and know how to, do they want to do that? Who are they really? So, example recently is, there's advice out there in the world, and I know where it comes from, that if you send a proposal to a client and they don't get back to you, you're supposed to send them something that says, have you decided not to do this project? And I think it's passive aggressive. I think it's manipulative. I know the purpose of it, but I get those emails all the time, and I think they gross me out. You got to know who you are, and you got to know what you're willing to do and not do, and not just follow any advice because you're desperate to get business, but don't do anything that is not aligned with who you actually are. And so you got to know your values, but you also have to know yourself well enough to say, you know what, ooh, ick, that's just not me.
However, at the same time, I think if you do want your business to grow, you probably have to accept that there's some personal growth has to go along with that. So sometimes you have to do uncomfortable things, and it's just that they're uncomfortable for you. They're not actually inherently gross.
That's
but
right.
understanding your values and listening to your values rather than your fear, because they're two different things.
Yeah, that's right. And you have to embrace that things are going to be outside of your comfort zone, as long as they're not outside of your value zone.
Yeah. So there's another question for me, which I think is a really important one, that when we're serving our customers, there's part of me wants to look at this and think, well, I'm going to stay loose because I don't really know what they need. But there's another part of me that thinks people buy packages. People need to be able to pick something off the shelf, knowing what's in the box. So how do you balance this need for responding to what's in front of you with the customer's need to be able to understand what they're buying in terms of packaging?
Yes. So this is interesting because different buyers want different things. So I have plenty of folks who hire me as a consultant that do not want a package. I actually did a podcast with one of my clients, long-term clients. And I asked her, what does she not like that consultants do? And she actually said, I don't want somebody pulling something off the shelf, giving it to me and saying, here, you have to do it our way. She likes that, I show up and we have, defined things that we're going to do, but there is flexibility within there and there's customization within there. Some clients don't want that. Some clients are like, just, I want you to walk me through your process. I want to buy this thing that you're doing. So that again goes back to, if you define your buyer, you're going to know, who your buyer is, what they like in that regard, and then what do you offer relative to that. But I would say, if I show up with a client and what I really think they need is, I think they need this, clearly defined package process, and they are, resistant to it. They want everything to be customized and whatnot. Then I do the critical thinking that, consultants can be very helpful with, which is I have conversations and I think about what actually is going to give them the result. And that's what I have a conversation with, always focused on what is it that you're trying to achieve? And then what are the perils and the path to actually getting there? And we end up having a conversation about that. And where we land is related to the result that they get, not related to the thing that we show up with. Now, that's because as a consultant, I actually like variety. And so I know that about myself. I would get bored doing the same thing over and over again. So I tend to pick engagements that maybe aren't 100% customized, but there's definitely some customization within them. I have also sold products, and that's a different thing. Those are different conversations that I have, where I will have conversations with the right buyers who want to buy a product. And then we talk about what the benefit is, how it helps them achieve the results that they care about. We talk through the features of it, and we talk through what the benefit of doing this particular type of defined process or using this product is. But it all goes back to being clear about who your buyer is relative to what you offer, and knowing what motivates them. And sometimes they're like, just, hey, take us through your thing. And sometimes they're like, no, we're special. And that's not always true, but we're special. And we want to feel special, in which case you as a consultant can decide, well, maybe you're still taking them, through your package services, but how can you make it legitimately feel like a special process for them? And that then might not be in the product or, package that you're delivering. It might be something that is through the actual experience and the different touch points they have with you. You can make those decisions, but you got to know what your buyer wants, which means you have to know who your buyer is.
Yeah, that's really good advice. So I have a couple of places I want to go still. The first one is the P word, price. If you're somebody who's never sold consulting before, particularly into corporate, I think if you're accustomed to dealing with small business, you know how small business operates. Corporate's a different animal. And the last thing anybody wants is to sell something at one price, get the work, and then discovered, they would have added a zero onto this quite happily.
Yes.
But at the other end of the spectrum, you don't want to scare people off. So how do people navigate pricing within consulting for the first time?
Yeah. So the first thing is, and I actually have a free training I'm doing on LinkedIn on May 9th, where I'm going to go through not just how to approach pricing, but also pricing models. So pricing models is basically not what you charge, but how you charge. So the first thing that I do when I approach pricing, because I don't price things using the same pricing model every single time. There are a whole number of factors. And again, I go over those in the training that you have to consider when you're picking what you're doing. Now, if you have a, set defined package services, then, you know what it is and you know how to charge for it. But if you do different types of consulting, then you have to make these choices. So the first thing is I trust myself when I am engaging with a client. And if I see things, then I trust myself that I saw them. So for example, if let's say I'm meeting with the CEO and a few other leaders, and I can see that they don't agree, that even they have not yet come to a point where they can clearly articulate the result that they want to achieve. And if I ask them all separately, they would say the same thing. They're just not there yet. And yet they want me to, do a big proposal and price out this huge engagement. But the problem with that is that has inserted uncertainty, right? Because I know that I'm going to have to spend time, getting them, onto the same page and in agreement about, what they're ultimately trying to accomplish. And chances are, this is the tip of the iceberg. There's probably a lot of other things they don't agree on. So in that case, I think first about the type of pricing model that allows me to better manage uncertainty. If it's a engagement over multiple years, then I also want to think about that because that inserts a lot of uncertainty. So, or if I go in and I have a conversation and they are, they're crystal clear, they can clearly articulate, what they've done into this point. They know what the result they want. We know with some clarity about what it takes to actually achieve it. We're clear about what my role is going to be. Then I would choose a different pricing model. And I would choose one that is favorable to me and also favorable to the client. This is where, self-reflection also comes in. So I'm really good if there is scope creep at managing it. I have no problem having conversations with clients about, timeline, budget, scope, all of that. A lot of new consultants have great difficulty with that, so they'll end up losing money because they don't know how to manage it. So I have to also know those things about myself. All of that goes into decisions that I make about the pricing model, because I have to know that before I can pick the price. And so some things will be a flat fee. So it'll be a single project fee. We know exactly what goes into actually achieving it. Roles are really clear. And in that way, what I'm doing when I do a flat fee is I'm also rewarding myself if I'm very efficient. If I did something where everything was certain and I charged an hourly fee, and this is something that I've been doing for a really long time and I'm good and I'm fast, I would be penalizing myself for my expertise, my experience, and my ability, based on those, my ability to be efficient. So I would never choose an hourly rate for that. If there's a lot of uncertainty, I might choose an hourly rate because we don't know how this is going to flex up and down. And a flat fee could end up having me, lose some money. So I think about all of those things before I get to the price. And then, in developing the price itself, one thing I would say is ignore any advice of using your salary from your last job to define what your price is, because there was just different variables that went into why you had that salary. And being a consultant is very different. So it's a different process. But, this is where what I typically do is I will do a layered approach where, even if it's a flat fee or a value-based payment or it's a retainer or anything, I want to make sure that I have set what the floor is. And what I mean by setting the floor is that if I were paid hourly, that I would at least make that, but then I'm going to layer things on top of it that get me to the price that really truly defines what my value is. Now, establishing sort of, what your hourly rate would be if you charged hourly, takes a bit of an iterative process. You need to have some conversations in your market once you know what it is you do, who you serve, you can talk to, folks who, know your buyer, know the type of work that you're talking about, and find out what other consultants are charging. I've actually had conversations with other consultants who are good, wonderful people who might do complementary work, and they've been pretty forthcoming with it. Sometimes
Yeah.
if you can't get that information, you might have to experiment, in which case I generally say, if they say yes to your price without blinking, you probably were too low, in which case raise it next time. But that's kind of what I like to start with. And then I build things on top of it, which is, if I think that there's going to be, a lot of, drama, let's just say, within this, I want to make sure that my price, covers that I'm going to be handling that. If there's something unique that I'm bringing to the table that they can't get easily from anybody else, that is going to be another layer I add on to the price. So there's additional layers that I put on that will help me get to a price that says, if I made this, I believe that this is worth it to them and it's worth it to me. And that's sort of the shorthand version of saying it.
Yeah. So I guess the last place I want to go really is this chestnut of, on the one hand, I want to be the best kept secret. Like, I'm the assassin that they're going to hire when they really need to get the job done. And I'm the secret. Everybody knows who I am, but I'm the elite option. And this idea that quality rises to the top, but I don't need to market. I don't need to market. I'm super elite. And yeah, it might be your skills are there, but you're not necessarily there in the market, but that's the ideal. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have got, if that person that I just described was the best kept secret, the other person's the celebrity option. Everybody knows who he is or she is.
Right.
And they have a really strong online presence and they're very out there. How do we strike the balance between these two options?
Yeah. Again, and I know I sound like a broken record, or it all goes back to your buyer. Who do you most want to be working with? And what are the types of things that they respond to? And so when I built my consulting business, and I've been doing this for over 13 years, social media marketing wasn't a thing. It just wasn't. And, when I first started, I worked with a firm who, by their own admission, lovely firm, but by their own admission, they didn't spend a lot of time on their website or anything like that. So I didn't send people to it because I also did things that weren't traditional to what the firm did. So if somebody went and looked at it, it wouldn't make any sense to them. So I didn't really have any sort of marketing support for what I did. So I largely built my business off of, outreach strategies, being at the right type of events, speaking, things like that. It was a different approach. Those were the types of things that my buyer responded to. So I had a conversation with a CEO that I work with the other day because I'd seen a social media post that quote unquote came from her. And I said, "Oh, I really like that thing you posted." She said, "I'm on LinkedIn." And, the reality is no, that was her marketing person that did that. And which is a legitimate thing for them to do. She's not paying attention to social media marketing. What she does pay attention to is there are at least 2 or 3 events every single year that anyone who is, whether they're the assassin or the, celebrity or anything else, you are seen there and you are offering value there. And that was a better approach for me to do. But I only know that because I know who my buyer is. There are other buyers who want to see somebody on LinkedIn who they're saying extraordinarily valuable, helpful, generous things that make them think about things in a different way, help them achieve something, whatever it is. And that's what they respond to. And I think there's a gentleman, Zach Pike, who's on LinkedIn, who does, data science, and he puts out, videos, and he says, here's how you look at this type of data and here's what it tells you, et cetera. And he gets people coming to him all the time for that because that's works for his buyer.
I think that's a great answer. It's putting the customer first, putting the buyer first, and really thinking about who that is. And being for that person in everything you do. It just makes so much sense.
Yeah, you have to, because it's not, I mean, and I know you had another guest who said this, it's not about you.
Yeah.
It's about them. And yes, you're building a business, so you have to think about, yourself, and you have to know strategies and techniques and all of those things. But fundamentally, the goal is to serve the best we can. And if you approach it that way in everything that you do, people are going to be able to tell that and respond to it.
Deb, you have been awesome. I've learned so much today. I think we're going to have to do this again sometime with your permission.
I'd love to. This is so much fun.
But because really, I've only covered a quarter of the places I could have gone in a conversation. And I'm quite sure there'll be listeners screaming at me right now about some of the things I haven't asked you about. But for the listener who maybe wants to take things a little further with you, where can people find out about you?
Yeah, so you can go to craftofconsulting.com. That's my website. And actually, I have 335 podcasts that you can also listen to. So if I said scope creep and you're like, I have a problem with that, I actually have a whole podcast on scope creep or any number of topics. And I've got just wonderful, insightful guests as well. And then, you can also take a look at, I have a membership where I work directly with consultants in a community and do a number of other things. But if anybody is like, I need help with pricing, join me May 9th on LinkedIn. It'll also be recorded on LinkedIn afterwards. And I will spend 90 minutes going through the ins and outs and answering questions as we go along.
And I'll put a link to that in the show notes. So if you're listening to this in the next couple of weeks, you will have time to sign up for that. Deb, thank you so much for your time. For you at home listening, that does bring us to the end of another episode. Thank you for listening. And if you did enjoy the show, you will love the Personal Brand Business Roadmap. It's 55 pages of everything you need to start, scale, or fix your expert business. Just click the link in the show notes or visit amplifyme.agency/roadmap. Again, if you did enjoy this interview with Deb, thank you very much, Deb. Then I would invite you to leave a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. That's it, Deb. Thanks so much. And you home. See you next time.
My pleasure.